In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. I presume everybody can hear me. If you can't hear me, please write something in the chat box. We still haven't figured out how to get a good microphone. We keep getting scammed. One of the friars is supposed to be working out getting some adapter for the thing, and it hasn't been working out. We keep getting adapters that don't work on this computer. So hopefully the audio is okay. We're doing our best. Hopefully we'll have something for next time. We've already been through 2 of these. We're on our 3rd now. So today, what we wanted to talk about was I want to give a reflection, something that's very, we're kind of bouncing around in the spiritual life, but one of the reasons I actually want to deal with something, because I keep coming up with it, is right now the demons tend to be very, very strong because the whole world's kind of in the grip of the demons. And you can tell since everything's on a sexual level, they're giving children things they shouldn't be giving them and taking rights away from parents to the children. It's all about sexual things. And if you try to do something good, you're considered an enemy of the state, of the church, of your family. If you do something evil, everyone will protect you. It's just the way it is across the board. We see it in the church, and we're still very naive, a lot of us. Well, what you're doing is so good. You think the bishops would want that. You think everybody would. That's just not the way it works. It isn't the way it works. You speak out, you do good, you're crushed. You're crushed. But only for now. So we always have to speak out. We always have to do good. And if need be, we always have to be crushed, right? But what we want to look at today, there's a good reflection. And I just gave it to the boys. So some of them may have heard it. Any of you that have children like in the Marian Friars Youth. But I don't know if Gina, if you heard the talk we had the other day, or if all the ladies took off. Okay, that was good. Well, because it won't be a repeat for you. But there's a beautiful reflection. Francis de Osuna, he's that one he was a spiritual. He really kicked off that whole Recollection movement in Spain that St. Teresa of Avila and St. John of the Cross are so famous for. But it's funny because everybody right now, people they're flooding the Carmelites with vocations and everything, and they don't realize that the movement that they're following is actually, in its essence, it stems from the Franciscan spirituality. It's just not Franciscan spirituality isn't as complicated because there's not as many. It's just kind of active. Anyways, we've talked about that at other times. I think you probably still find that online. But what we want to talk about here is, we want to look at one of the avenues. We want to look at spiritual combat. And I don't want to talk about spiritual combat the way everybody does it in America, where we're getting into some kind of sentimental spiritual combat. No, we want to look at the actual war that's taking place, that you're engaged in. And if you don't understand the steps and the phases of the battle, you lose. You always lose. And this is what Francis de Osuna says. If you get to round 3 of the battle, I mean, what he talks about is breaking the army. What you see in medieval warfare and even in the Bible, you see them always breaking their army in like 3s. Because you don't just take the entire mass of your army out there and let them get slaughtered. And you're not just flipping a coin and saying, let's just hope for the best. And then you send everybody out there. In the end, everybody's just slaughtered on the battlefield. You didn't do that. There was strategy. It might not have been a very sophisticated strategy because they're just still a bunch of guys out in a big field, but still there was a strategy. And normally the strategy was you had the bulk of your army, then you had your reserves, and then you had your elite. The point was to take the bulk of your army, you put them out there against the bulk of the other guy's army. If you start if you're getting to the point where you're beating the other guy's army or the other guy's beating you, you send the other reinforcements in to hopefully sway the way the battle's going, and hopefully take over the battlefield and rout your foe. If that starts to go really well, then you send in the elite. Now, a lot of us have heard more recently, because you've probably been listening to different talks and things like that, but the Muslims, when they would raid or conquer a town, they would just take all the Christian children and sell them they'd sell the families into slavery, but they would take the young boys, and they would raise them as elite military force called Janissaries. So what they did was it was a mockery of Christian religious life. What they did is they took these young boys, they raised them in the most rigorous, militant camps. So they were the elite. But they led them in such discipline that they were celibate. They were just celibate warriors. That's all they did. That's all they existed for. They were there to fight, and they were the best. So that you knew when the Janissaries got released on you, you had to really, I mean, not that they defeated us every time. We did quite well against the Janissaries quite often, but they were the best. They were the European orphans that were taken into their military were, the Christian orphans. They were the best. So that's the elite force. We can think about that elite force. So you've got these, you break the army into three. Well, Francis de Osuna, he wants to break, he's given a spiritual reflection on how the devil works, the same strategy that the devil uses to overcome us in our spiritual battle. So we're going to look at, hopefully this isn't too scattered. I didn't have a ton of time to prepare, but I think it'll be just fine. The point is not how beautiful the reflection is given, but we need the information from the reflection to practice it so we can overcome certain things. So he refers to this, to Francis de Osuna, in the book that he wrote. He talks about it being, it's called the third spiritual alphabet. Now, each one of these chapters, it just has a number to it, because this is a translation in English. It's more effective in its Spanish form. So I've been told. I don't speak Spanish. But the name of this chapter, which is, I think it's the 13th, or let me just see. I do have it written down. Let's see where it's at. Chapter, oops, it's in my other book that I wrote it down. I think it's the seventh treatise. So it's basically like chapter 17. And then the treatise is, but it has its own chapters. But the name of this letter that he says, he calls it "Thoughts Start Wars If the Gates Are Not Closed." Thoughts start wars if the gates are not closed. Now we're going to go and talk about what that means, so it makes a little bit more sense to you. But first, we want to do a comparison of battle, conquest in a militaristic form and on a natural level to that of the demonic. And in Maccabees, which we're going to be referencing quite a lot, in Maccabees, Francis de Osuna, he gives at the very beginning of Maccabees, he kind of gives a parallel between what Alexander the Great conqueror that put the whole world, it says the whole world was at peace at his feet, was quiet before him, not peace, but quiet before him. Because Alexander just went across the whole face of the known earth at that time and he threw down all the strongholds. He captured, killed, and conquered over all the kings, and everything was his. The parallel there is that's exactly what the devil did. Now I'm going to go through, let me just read you real quick what it says, then we'll go through and I'll give a bit of an analysis of it. Now it came to pass, this is chapter 1, let me see this. It's just the very beginning of First Maccabees. Yeah, very first, as soon as you go into the first chapter of Maccabees, this is what you encounter. Now it came to pass after that, Alexander, the son of Philip, so Alexander the Great, the Macedonian, who first reigned in Greece. We're going to skip this part. I think we can go straight to. He fought many battles and took the strongholds of all. He slew the kings of the earth. Now remember, when you're slewing the kings of the earth, you're slewing the rightful authority of those places. He's just going in and rightfully destroying and killing the people who have rightful ownership and lawful authority from God to rule over those people. He's wiping everybody out and taking over their reign. And he went through even to the ends of the earth and took the spoils of many nations, and the earth was quiet before him. And he gathered a power, a very strong army. And his heart was exalted and lifted up. And he subdued countries of nations and princes, and they became tributaries to him. And after these things, he fell down upon his bed and he died. That's what happens. So the commentary we would give is this. He fought many battles, that is, against the sons of men. So we're not talking about Alexander. We're talking about the devil, and we're using Alexander was a perfect example of demonic influence in the world. Alexander was somebody who was a son of the devil. He became someone who conquered everything and had everything at his feet, like the prince of this world is the devil. So he's a perfect parallel to the devil. Now we're not drawing, I don't know, we don't want to judge Alexander. That's not my point. Some historian's going to get mad at me and write me a bunch of letters. That's not what I'm trying to get at right now. There's a parallel here. And so he fought many battles against the sons of men. We face it today. And every one of you, if you're not actually aware of the battle that the devil's waging against you, you're going to lose it. That's part of us becoming religious. If you want to be a secular religious, you're entering into a stronger battle. You have a greater duty and responsibility to overcome and give glory and honor to God so you can go to heaven. That's the point. That's the reason. We're not joining a club. We keep bringing it up. This is not a club. It's not a Franciscan club where everybody, I like the Franciscans. I took St. Francis, my confirmation saint, and I've always been attracted to bunnies. That isn't why you become a third order member. It's because we want to go to war with our foe and make it to heaven in a very serious way. Not just make it through the door, but bring as many people as we can with us while conquering our own battles and making it to heaven. That's holiness. So he fought against the sons of men. He took the strongholds of all. What's the stronghold of a man? But his virtue. Not his towers, not his castles. You throw enough, if they could launch enough of the stones at the stone wall, it all crumbles. Earthquake makes it crumble. You could dig underneath it and weaken the foundation, it can crumble. The stronghold of a man's is virtue. And that's what the devil wants to attack, is your virtue. And he slew the kings of the earth, Adam and Eve. They had dominion over everything. And he slew them spiritually. And he went through even to the ends of the earth. Original sin. Original sin went through all the ends of the earth, through Adam and Eve, and every child that would be born after them. When he conquered that stronghold, when he slew that king and that queen, he caused sin to go through the entire world, and he conquered all. So think about it, from the time of Adam and Eve until Christ, how many went to hell? More than the great majority. The just that lived the law, which St. Paul tells us is almost impossible, they were there waiting for Christ, but the great majority went to hell. Because original sin has real consequences, and it weakens us to a state where we have a difficult time attaining to virtue and holiness. That is, before Christ, we would have called that justification. It's the same thing after Christ, but to the just. And he took the spoils of many nations. That is grace. He took the sonship away from the sons of God. Because grace, without grace, you forfeit your inheritance as a son of God. If you have no grace, you have no hope before the throne of God. Without grace, you're a child of the devil, and you will go to him. That's just the way it works. Don't get mad at Friar Anthony. He's only telling you it's a simple thing. If you have grace in your heart when you die, God finds himself in you. If you don't have grace in your heart when you die, he doesn't find himself in you, and he does not love what he doesn't love what he can't find. He loves himself in you. And if he can't find himself in you, he has no love for you. And that's why he says, be gone, I never knew you. That's what he says to the goats that are on the left. They're goats because they don't have grace. Don't get confused on the humanism that we live in today, that God just loves you because, you know, we love cute little children, and somehow you're a cute little children. If you're not in a state of grace, you're a goat. And if you've ever seen an old, ugly goat, they look crazy. Like you don't even like looking them in the eye. They look weird. You know, they got the horns and their eyes are all nuts and their faces are bony and they got this strange beard. They're not pleasant to look at. And that's what Christ says we are without grace. And the earth was quiet before him. That is, when he causes somebody to crumble under mortal sin, they're usually crumpled under mortal sin because they've become now attached to something they ought not be attached to. They're doing something they ought not be doing. They're choosing something over God, and it's bringing them pleasure that God does not bring them right now. So by bringing someone to a state of mortal sin, habitual sin, that is vice, he has the whole world quiet at his feet. Why? Because they will serve him, because he will continue to give them what they want. The men, we were having recreation the other night, and I don't know about these things. There's some documentary called Hell's Bells. Probably everybody's seen it. I don't know anything about this stuff. Like good father always says, whenever you talk about these kind of things, he says, "Oh, I was praying my rosary when that was going on." I can't say I was praying my rosary when that was going on, but hopefully. But anyways, there was a documentary called Hell's Bells, and in there, I guess it was made by Protestants, but in there, they were telling me that a lot of these famous musicians, they play music. You'll notice even when they're like, I think got like AC/DC, or no, Alice. I don't know, those guys who would paint their faces all funny and stick their tongues out. I forget the name of that group, but Kiss. I think they're called Kiss. Those guys are like in their 80s, I think. I think they're like in their 80s, and they're still doing the exact same thing. And we look at it and just say, "Oh, those old guys are just, they probably just need the money or something." Actually, this documentary says that no, they basically made a pact with the devil that if they ever stop singing, they'll die. So they have to just keep singing. And they reference, now I'm not saying this from authority, I haven't seen the thing, and I don't know, this was just during recreation, but they were telling me that Bob Dylan, I guess he's old too, and he still sings stuff, but somebody did an interview with him and said, "You're older, why do you keep playing?" And they said, all he said was, "Because the boss makes me." Who's the boss? When you're that rich, you don't have to keep going around on tour. When you're 80 years old, you can hang out, but no, they'll die, right? The earth is quiet at his feet. And he gathered a power and a very strong army. Think about it today. The whole world seems locked in the same mindset. So that strong army, when he gathered that power and that strong army, it's all those who have fallen into sin and are not willing to be released from it. Right? Sin. When you find someone who is, they're just used to their sin and they're not going to change, to soothe their conscience, they tell you you're wrong, right? You're wrong because you think sodomy is wrong. You're wrong because children should be able to have sex changes when they're 10 years old and their parents shouldn't have any. You're wrong, right? Their conscience is pricked, and because you live, hopefully, a pure life, you're wrong. He's gathered a strong army in these people of sin that he's caused to fall from their virtue, and they are helping to keep the earth subdued at his feet. and his heart was exalted and lifted up, because their filth, so that individuals, because in the filth of their sin, they become more wicked than the devil. It's a quote from Francis de Osuna. So they become exalted and lifted up, because in the filth of their sin, they become more wicked than the devil. And he subdued countries of nations, that is, all the pagan people who worship the devil. And St. Paul says it, the pagan people did worship the devil. Even at the time, right after Noah, right after the flood, Noah had the true religion, and his sons knew the true religion. Well, Noah was alive still. It seems that Noah was a contemporary of Abraham. That sounds crazy, doesn't it? No, he lived a long time. Remember the genetic entropy that's happening now, where we only live a certain amount of time, and there's so much genetic DNA that just got destroyed in the earth with the whole flood. After that, everybody started living a shorter amount of time. We started getting more sickly. Other things started happening. The great strong men that came from Adam weren't anymore. They started getting weaker and weaker because of the earth was weaker after the flood. Everything was weaker. I'm not saying the earth like the material stuff. I just mean, I guess I am. The foods and the biodiversity would have probably been greatly decreased and everything else. So Noah continues to live for a while, but right around the time Noah dies, Abraham's already on the earth. By the time of Abraham, remember, everybody forgot who God was already, and they were worshiping idols. St. Paul says an idol's nothing. It's worship of the devil. That's what it is. So when he says they gathered, and they subdued the countries of nations, that is, the devil subdued them into false worship. They stopped worshiping the true God. And that's why God went and introduced himself again to Abraham. He started a personal encounter, a personal relationship with Abraham, made a promise, a covenant with Abraham. Abraham passed it on to his kids. They're called the patriarchs. The patriarchs go into Egypt. That becomes the nation of Israel. Remember, that was Jacob who wrestled with the angel. Called him Israel, he who struggles with God. After they come out of Egypt, they're a strong race of people. They're not just a family anymore of 70, 75 people that went into Egypt. Now they're a couple million, right? So they're a race of people. They're still God's people. And they're falling all the time, but still he reveals through Moses organized religion. And organized religion comes down to us until Christ, where he fulfills that organized religion, and that's what we live today. And the princes, and they became tributaries of him, that is, workers of his wickedness, and revelers in sin, demons in the flesh. This is what it means to be a tributary of Satan. He gives you what you want. You might not live that long, but he gives you what you want. But you've got to pay for it. Just like they say, for us to save souls, you got to pay for those souls. You got to suffer and pay for those souls. If you want the joys of this world, that those who want to revel in sin, they consider that the joys of this world. Because remember that the joys our Lord tells us we will have in abundance. Those who leave father and mother and spouse and children and lands for his name's sake will have 100 times more in this life and the next. But he says, with persecutions, right? It's not just like you're going to be happy, you're going to get more, you're going to leave your family, but I'll give you more family. That's not it. With persecutions in this life. It's not so necessarily with those who are working for the devil. You keep serving him, he'll keep giving you all the flesh, the world, the flesh, and the devil that you want. But then you're gonna suffer for all of eternity in hell, because he's gonna hate you more than anybody else. So we see a good parallel between Alexander and the devil, and how if we don't fight against this wicked foe, this strong Alexander, who's the demon, then we can easily fall. So now we need to look at, what does the battle consist? Now, if we go back to David and Goliath, which we talked about last time, you remember David was a warrior from his youth. He was a great warrior from his youth. And this is also a parallel with the devil. He's been a great warrior since his youth. He's been looking to destroy the sons of men since he fell, which would have been a short time after he was created by God. It's not like centuries and millennia went by. No, they were tested right away. And boom, he fell. But they were outside of time. So a small duration of time outside of time is, whatever. How do you talk about these things? But anyways, from basically from after his creation, right when he fell, from that point in time, he's that cunning warrior to destroy the works of God. He actually believes that he can overcome the power of God. But though he can't, he can offend God by causing you to go to hell. And that's where the war comes in. He doesn't care about you. He just thinks by making you fall, which is just another day in the life of being Satan, by making you fall, he can offend God one more way. Because you were created for his glory and honor. You were created to go to heaven and give him glory and honor by your life. That's it. You live on earth, give glory and honor to God, and then worship him for all of eternity. And he immensely pays you back for it because he's so happy that you just wanted to glorify him. He does more for you, it seems. It's just like this holy competition, but how could you outdo God? The devil doesn't want you to glorify God. And so the war, it's an all-out war to make you fall. But he does it in 3 stages. Just like it says in 1 Kings 13, it says, and it is said, the Philistines went out from the camp in 3 companies to plunder. It's always in 3s. Maybe 3s, because 3 is not a natural number. Maybe it's a way of also reflecting on the fact that they're trying to destroy the Holy Trinity within inside of us. They're trying to make that holy temple of ours fall. But they plunder in companies of 3. The first company, that's the body of the army, right? This is the first attack that we come under. The very first attack that we come under, that the devil wants you to fall in this attack, and most fall under it. Most will always fall under it. Because he doesn't want to exert any energy. He wants you to be so humiliated. He wants to win you through doing most nothing to destroy your eternity. So the first thing he sends against you, the first bulk of the army, and it's the bulk of the army because it actually decimates the greatest number of souls on earth, is luxury. Luxury. That's the first battalion, the battalion that goes against you, the company that goes against you to plunder, to fight. The bulk of the army that you're against is luxury. Comfort, ease, enjoyment, preference. We find this in, too much sleep, too much play, too much food. We're disordered in all these things. Anything that's impure. All the pleasures. We want pleasure. After the fall, our concupiscence got distorted. Adam and Eve didn't have any problem with all of creation. They didn't have a single problem with it. Everything God created was good. And they were able to enjoy that good without any excess ever. They would eat as much as they needed to. They would sleep as much as they needed to. They would do as much as they needed to in anything because they were ordered properly. So they used God's creation properly. And so they used it in a good way. So they didn't sin. But remember, Adam and Eve fell by like noon the first day. So it's not like they had a long time. But the thing is that after the fall, it becomes distorted now. Now I have a desire to eat more than I should because I like the taste of it. Now I want to sleep longer than I should because I really don't want to face my day. I want to just kind of lay there and fade in and out of sleep. The impurity, I don't even need to mention. Everybody knows about that. Anything against the sixth commandment is always grave matter. We just don't, but we're so heavily drawn to that in our flesh. This is why we're called to the poverty, chastity, and obedience. You and the world are called to that according to your state in life, are called to those counsels, right? We religious are called to them in vows. You're called to them in counsels. The counsel because Christ lived this way. All Christians are to live this way in imitation of Christ, according to your state, right? So even the married can't just do whatever they want to. You know, they have to do things in reason, in moderation, with higher ideals. Everything should be done with a very high Christian dignity. He gets most people on this, and we know it. You walk down the street and you see the way people are dressing. You see what they're wanting to spend their money on. You see how they're willing to what they're morally willing to compromise so they can have all the comforts of life. They'll do something immoral just so that they can continue to go on vacation, right? They're not willing to really sacrifice. A lot of these weaker souls aren't willing to sacrifice anything. So you throw up some kind of hurdle to the desire of the flesh that they have, or the what we say is the world, the flesh, and the devil. You throw it up against these, the pride of life, the lust of life, or the avarice of life, and they just crumble. It's like, nope, just keep giving me what I need here right now. I'll do whatever you tell me. The world's calm at his feet. Right? That's the first company, luxury. But most of you are probably going to overcome the first company of soldiers, the great bulk of the battle. Every once in a while, somebody might fall, but you've got enough sense to get up, go to confession, clean yourself off, make a good resolution, and never do that thing again. So we can sit back on our laurels. I don't even know what that means, but we can sit back on our laurels and we can look at the fact that I don't do those things. I don't do those filthy things of the flesh. I'm not avaricious. At least I don't think I am. I don't have it. Not my conscience isn't pricked by it in any way. I try my best not to have any pride. Not the pride, but I try to get up. I try to get up the proper time. I try to only eat moderately. Whatever. So we're able to do that. When we look at that, we see that someone who's living or trying to live more virtuously, they see the filth. They see the filth in the luxuries of the world. They see the filth in reveling in things they ought not be reveling in, right? And so, and just to make a distinction, I keep getting accused of heresy by some individual. We're not talking about the things of the earth being evil. We're talking about our concupiscence being attracted to the things of the earth so that we turn away from God and turn towards the creature. That's the definition of sin, right? A thing in and of itself isn't evil. God created everything and it's good. But when I turn my back on God and I make a created thing my new God, that's sin. You're reveling in evil. That's filth. So the second company, maybe we're not doing that. So we think I would never dare do those things, right? And we enter into pride of life. It's a threefold concupiscence. The world, the flesh, and the devil. 3. We talked about there's 3 battles. There's the main body, there's the reserves, and there's the elite. We already saw the first main body, luxury, flesh. That's the first concupiscence. Most fall because of the flesh, a weakness in our concupiscence. The second company, that's that reserve. If you get past that, the devil will sneak in this next group. Much more difficult because here you're talking about riches. We've been taught in America We've been taught, I'm sorry, there's people not only in America, but we've been taught in a lot of these more developed countries that to be successful, and maybe some of you are watching from countries that are still kind of a Catholic culture, but we have a Calvinist culture. So our idea here is that we have to succeed. We have to have it all matters on how much money you're making. And then that amount of money that we make sure we live according to that amount of money. So no matter who you are, you're still strapped for money because you're living according to however much you make, which is, it's perverted. That's not the way we're supposed to live. We should live simply like Christ. And then if we have a bunch of extra money there, we can do good things for Christ's beloved, the least, right? But we don't do that. We never do that. Riches, honor, fame, favor, acknowledgement. You know you seek these things. You all seek these things. You hate it when someone doesn't acknowledge you for something that you did. He didn't do that. I did that. Why do you have to tell somebody, somebody comes to your house and you paint a picture and they tell your spouse, you did a great job. And you say, oh, he didn't do that. I did that. You want the acknowledgement. You want the honor. Why is it that at my job I do more and that so-and-so doesn't do anything? They get paid more than I do. You want the riches. Do you see? We have to be detached from these things. This is very subtle. And every time we go down flesh, this is the world. So we have the world, the flesh, and the devil. The first one's our weakest point, flesh. That's the first battalion that comes in to wipe out the great majority. If we make it through that one, sends in the world, pride of life. You're seeking honors, acknowledgement, favor, recognition. The devil will come in, or at least he'll send in the world for this, because it's not a spiritual battle necessarily. It's still on the level of the earthly, of the natural. It happens right here, right? It happens all around us. And it happens naturally. You can't blame the devil for everything. Oh, he sent so-and-so to, no. These things happen in this life. Maybe he's doing it, maybe he's not doing it, but bad things happen. And the first two levels, with the main body and with the reserves, this is on a natural level. Now, if you make it through the flesh and you make it through with the humility of the saints, you make it through the desire for, the pride of life, the desire for honors and riches and acknowledgement and favor. If you make it through all that, also, I want to just mention it so you can actually hear it. The desire to be needed, especially the older people, your children. It hurts when your children don't need you anymore. It hurts when people even your own spouse doesn't really want to ask you anything. Nobody cares about you anymore. The older you get in our culture, the less you're worth. You're not worth anything. Nobody needs you. You don't have any advice to give. You didn't have any things stored up. You're not even going to leave me anything when you're dead. I'm just going to put you away. You know what it's like. It's a difficult way to go for older people today. But that doesn't change anything for you. That's a natural battle. And if you get sucked into it, you just lost. The reinforcements came in and they took it from you. You can't let this pride of life, the fame, riches, honor, being needed, being applauded, you can't let that affect you. Detachment. If your children walk away from you, love them and be detached from them. You did your job. They have to fend for themselves. You got to pray for them, whatever. But they're God's. You did your job. Now, finally, let's see. I think I have some notes here. Let me just see. So this is from Francis de Osuna. The first, that is the luxury, seems so dirty. These seem like good things, meaning the honor, riches, fame, acknowledgement. These seem like good things in comparison to the filth of luxury. They belong to those who we hold up in society as the great ones. Pride puffs up, turns our thoughts and actions to our own glorification rather than that of God. Gives us a false sense of ourselves. But we all want it. We all want it, but those who take it fall. Those who take it fall. If you could see on the spiritual level, when your children treat you like garbage, you are blessed by God. If you don't deserve it. If your spouse treats you badly, you are blessed by God. The list goes on. All of these difficulties that we face day in and day out, no matter how hard and difficult they get, it feels like your heart's being ripped out of your chest, torn in two, and finally you look to God and say, why? You're verging now on blasphemy. God has given you a gift, and you're on the verge of cursing him for it. God allows us to live the cross of Christ, and that is a blessing, not a curse. But to live the cross of Christ means to actually face hardship and difficulty, because once you die, for those who face this, you'll never face hardship or difficulty ever again. No one will ever be upset with you. No one will ever backbite you. No one will ever not love you again. Heaven doesn't have that stuff. So you can see how we can fall into that. The pride can be something we can fall into. The luxury, the desire for acknowledgement, fame, honors, being needed. It's very real to us, and it affects all of us in a very real way. That's the second battalion. The third company, the elite, the Janissaries, we'll call them the Janissaries, they come in to finish the job off. If you have made it through the luxury, if you have made it through the pride of life, the honors, if you've made it through these two, then the elite are very angry now. They're very angry. And now it's time to put a stop to the whole thing. Now, what Francis de Osuna says, if you get to this point, if you let the devil in on it, you will not win. You will fall. You will not overcome the devil on this ground. Now, that's what we want to talk about. The first part, even though we're running out of time already, that's only to put in place things we should already be getting past. It's the final battle is where he gets us and we fall. You will not and cannot make it through this battle if you let the battle subdue you. If you allow the Janissaries to come on attack, you will not make it through. Okay? Now understand what I'm saying. I'm gonna explain now. First, I want to give you an example. It's another example that Francis de Osuna gives. Well, no, maybe he doesn't give it. I don't know who gives it, but I'm just going to open up. It's in Maccabees, 1 Maccabees, chapter 4. I think it's chapter 4. It's chapter 4, verse 35. But let me explain. So the Maccabees, you get Antiochus. He goes and just kind of he's running out of money. So he goes and starts doing war against, I think it's Ptolemaeus there in Egypt. And he wants to basically wants to conquer them because he needs money. And then he makes them subservient to him. And then he gets another. So they all go to war against Israel. Now Israel's got this huge fighting force against him. Well, they send one of the factions, King Gorgias. I don't know if he's a king or whatever, but he sends Gorgias against them with, I forget, like 15,000 men. The maybe it was 11,000. The Israelites only have 3,000. They don't even have armor or anything like that. And the Israelites just go out and say, we don't have anything to lose. Live or die, we're fighting these guys. They didn't have spears and they didn't have swords or anything. They went out in the middle of the field, they said a prayer to God, and they just crushed this army. They had breastplates and swords. They were a well-equipped army, and they crushed them. And the reason, well, I'll get into that in a minute. Anyways, they fled. Gorgias, he flees. Well, somebody else that was there, one of these other kings that were helping out Antiochus, they're all he sees it, and his name is Lysias. I hope I'm saying it right. So Lysias takes a large army. I think I forget what a score is. I think it's 10,000, but I think it's like 35,000 men he takes out on the battlefield, well equipped. 5,000 of them are on horseback. That's a big deal. Against 10,000 Israelites. And I don't think they had any horseback. Well, they went to war against them, and the Israelites, they fled again. When this proud, strong leader saw his army being decimated and fleeing from the face of these Israelites, though they grossly outnumbered them, and it says this, and then Lysias saw that his men were put to flight, and how bold the Jews were, and that they were ready either to live or to die manfully. Then he went to Antioch, because they were so boldly ready to live or die. Now you think about that. Think about that second battalion that came at you and how weak you get just because your children won't call you anymore or whatever else it is. Those are difficult things, and I'm not trying to say those are easy. But we have to be able to face the spiritual life ready to live or die, ready to be on this earth full force or go full force, meaning die full force. Just everything for God, all or nothing, be ready. So that means when the fullness of all the difficulties befall us, like it did Job, if you're ready to fight with all your might, live or die, you're going to send everything to flight. Even though your heart feels ripped in two, you're going to send everything to flight, because nothing on this earth means anything to you. It's the glory of God that means something to you. I hope that makes sense. You've got to make this stuff not just make sense because you've seen it in a movie once. You have to make it make sense in your mind so you can translate it into everyday spiritual life. When you get stepped on by somebody, you've got to apply it right there. Not think about, well, if they come to my door, if Biden sends his legions to my door to tell me I got to get the shot, then I'm going to whatever. No. It happens in the little things is when we fall. We're not ready. You've got to internalize this stuff. So what we see here is Lysias. His name, here's a reflection that Asuna gives us, is Lysias. His name means to unbind. To unbind. Now, in his reflection, what he's talking about is when we unbind, what the devil wants to do in this third attack, he wants to come in and he wants to unbind our recollection. If our recollection gets unbound, it unbinds our relationship with God. If our relationship with God gets unbound, then we lose the spiritual life. We lose our striving for heaven. Because you got to remember, religion is a relegare. It's to bind us, to bind us to God. That's what religion means. Lysias, he sees us with our fervor. He goes to Antioch, where the pagans are. Remember, above, they're the ones who worship the devil. And he gets the devils and he brings them back so that more come to fight against us. This is where the Osuna's alphabet, the chapter comes in. Thoughts start wars if the gates are not closed. When your recollection gets broken, when your recollection gets unbound, and a lot of you are not at recollection yet, what that means is you've got to get to the point where you can subdue your thoughts. Not subdue them like the Buddhist people do when they're doing their yoga stuff. We're not looking for nirvana. What we mean is like we keep our thoughts on God. We don't go into the chapel and just sit there and not think. That's quietism. We don't do that. We go and lift our heart and our mind to God. We pray to God. We love God. It's an active thing that we're doing. So in our everyday daily life, what's it going to help us to be listening to the radio? Where does secular media help us? How about worthless, empty conversation at home? Now, I understand at work, it's hard to get away. Some of you work with secular people, and it's hard to get away from worthless, empty talk. But you don't have to necessarily encourage it. You can just kind of be present and do your best to what you're able to participate in, you can participate in. But if it starts going awry, you've got to figure out ways to get away, because we don't need to participate in their sin and offending God, which is almost impossible. When St. Paul even says we're not to be fleeing everybody, because the world's the world. It is what it is now. But we still need to be able to show them a higher standard. We have to show them true Christian living. In fact, this is what, as third order members, you're all called to do. Be Christ. They need to see there's something different about them. There's something upright, strong about them. And eventually they'll ask, why is it you never use foul language? Why is it you let them treat you that way? Why is it? Why is it? Why is it? You never joke like this. You never go to these places. You never do this kind of thing. Why is it? So in that recollection, in this chapter, thoughts start wars if the gates are not closed. If you go and you look at all the old medieval warfare, you would hold up in your castle, which would be like your whole town probably. And you got your fortified walls, and you got your towers, and you got your bridge that you pulled up, and you would defend that bridge. But what did you try to do as a warrior that was outside sieging? Because it was harder to siege than to be inside. You would try to get over the wall, open the drawbridge, and let everybody in. If they got in, you're pretty much done. They're going to massacre the whole city. They're going to take all your spoils. If it got to the point during siege warfare that you didn't actually, if you're being sieged and you knew you're going to lose, if you hold out to the very end, it was basically the law of the land. You've basically submitted yourself to the enemy to be wiped out. Everyone's going to be annihilated. If you hold out to the very end, which means you're going to inflict more casualties on the army that's invading you, if they actually make it into your fortification, they're just going to kill everybody. That was accepted back then. So whenever you hear about Christians that did that, that's because that was the law of the land. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm not saying it's good. But that's what you did. It was punishment for they should have surrendered. They should have surrendered. Again, I'm not condoning anything. I'm just telling you what it was. We don't hear that a lot of times. They just say we Christians were wrong. So what we're trying to do is keep the gates closed of our internal forum, that is our internal spiritual presence. We have to be present to God, present to ourselves. Not constantly letting all these thoughts, and you know what I'm talking about, run around in your head. I think I've given that reflection before, and maybe I should give it again. It's another reflection from Deus Suna, but he uses Ezekiel, where he talks about this wheel that spins in the different directions. It has 4 different animals on the wheel, and on that wheel symbolizes nature and all sending these thoughts from the 4 winds of the earth, and it shows us not recollected. When our thoughts are that way in our head, we're not recollected. If you're not recollected, you will not enter into contemplative prayer. You won't do it. And as lay people in the world, don't be confused. You're called to contemplative prayer. Don't ever let anybody say you're not. You're not just called to say the rosary. We're to say the rosary is contemplatives. You're not just called to say your couple of verbal prayers. You're called to be a contemplative. But you can only get there through silence and recollection. Recollection leads you into contemplation. Because if your thoughts are all over the place, God is not going to start praying in you, which is what happens in contemplation. We've talked about other places. We can talk about it again later. But just to kind of finish off this thought, because it's already 12 here. When these elite come to us in this third battle, the third company to basically just decimate us, the demons are fed up. They're not going to let you win. They're not going to let you beat them. And you have to remember, it's when we look at all those The great armies that form up outside. I think I read something here earlier. I forget what the quote is now. Maybe I have it in here. Yeah, I can't remember. But we stand alone. But here's another quote from Maccabees. Here we go. It's a beautiful quote. There's a lot of beautiful quotes in here because they were an army that was fighting for the love of God against all odds. And that's where we are. So we can take a lot from the Maccabees. Very heroic. Judas said to him, "It is an easy matter for many to be shut up in the hands of a few. And there is no difference in the sight of God, in the sight of the God of heaven, to deliver a greater multitude or with a small company. It is an easy matter for many to be shut up in the hands of a few. And there is no difference in the sight of the God of heaven to deliver a great multitude or with a small company." So for us, weak little nobodies, which really isn't true, because with the grace of God, with the sacraments and our guardian angel and the full force of heaven behind us, because God doesn't want anybody to fall, with all of that behind us, it's nothing for God to be able to, with this small company, to subdue a multitude. So what comes at us in this third company is a multitude of demons, a multitude. Lysias went to Antioch to get a multitude to come back, right? It's nothing for God to see us through this battle. But our job is just to keep those gates closed. Now, what do these gates look like? What do these difficulties look like? How does he try to get the gate open? This, Deosuna says, this is the most furious and cunning, being the demons themselves, this attack. It's the most furious and cunning. Like you get besieged completely. This is where that darkness comes from. We'll feel ourselves in darkness sometimes. Now, Christian darkness, when we're actually like dark night of the soul, dark night of the senses, which you in the world have a greater difficulty with than us in religious life. We all have to face it if we're going to advance in the spiritual life. But in the world, well, you know what it's like. When you feel depressed, what do? You turn on the radio. When you feel depressed, what do? You go shopping. You go visit somebody. You go do something. You change your environment. What does a religious do when they feel that? They go sit in their cell and they wrestle with God, or they lose their vocation. Changing your environment, always trying to change your environment, always trying to flee from that dark cloud that's setting on your shoulders isn't good. That's what the world tells us to do. You've got to stand manfully, and you've got to stand in that cloud, and you've got to wrestle with God. Israel, one who wrestles with God. Now, even those who wrestle with God, remember, Jacob walked away from that a bit crippled. It says God touched his heel, and he limped from that point on. Don't think that every time we go into battle, even with God, now, battle with God means growth in virtue. He doesn't tempt us. He brings something on us as a loving Father so that we can become stronger and stronger, so that we can advance in the spiritual life as he sees it. Because he knows that place in heaven that's called only for us. Remember, I think it's Apocalypse 2:17. It talks about that name. It's the essence of who you're supposed to be. He wants you there. But the only way you get there is through fighting a grave battle, wrestling with God. So when that cloud comes down on you, it could be that God's allowing the demons to besiege you, and it's ferocious and it's cunning. All these thoughts flood back from all these hurts and pains and wounds you've had in your soul for who knows how long, things that haven't been resolved, that you have to still work through, all the stuff that they tell you in psychology. No, you just need to stand up and realize God's there. It doesn't matter how many times you've been wounded or hurt or whatever else. You just need to keep going through. You're going to die soon enough. Thanks be to God. And you're going to go to heaven if you do these things. And you know it. You got to face it manfully. But it's going to be ferocious and cunning, being that the demons themselves who have come to battle men by thrusting into their imagination a whole throng of spiritual vices. You ever get an idea in the morning about something that happened, and then you start thinking about that person that said it, and then by the end of the day, you're really mad at that person? Where'd that thought come from? You know what I'm saying? You have to know what I'm saying. You know what happens. Next thing you know, you're not on speaking terms with somebody, and then later you find out they didn't say that. They didn't do that. Oh, I'm sorry. I was wrong. Where did that thought come from? It's called demonic thought plotting. The demons, it's that imagination that's a lower faculty within your soul. You have an intellect, you got a will, you got an imagination, you got the memory. In these two, the imagination and the memory, the demons can work. They can't enter your mind, that is your intellect, and they can't enter your will. But sometimes we can't differentiate between if we're not attentive. So in your imagination, you can just see a demon going, they know what happened with the friend that they heard you talking in your room one day about that friend. They take a thought and they throw it in there. You got these other thoughts that are all filtering around. Now you got that thought in there too. Next thing you know, you can't tell between that thought and your thoughts until that thought, because you start paying attention to it, becomes your thought. It starts to become a bigger and bigger thought. Let me give you another example. You know, there's times when you're sitting in your car and there's a fly in the car, but it doesn't bother you. And then there's times when you're in the car and there's a fly and it's driving you nuts. It's because you're paying attention to the fly. The other time you weren't paying attention to the fly, and now you're paying attention to the fly until you start swinging and trying to hit the thing and you almost fly off the road because you're trying to get this fly, right? That thought is only a fly, but the devil just takes that fly and he just throws it in there. What happens when you get a whole legion of demons that are coming to try to knock down your gate? Remember the name of our chapter here, our letter. Thoughts start wars if the gates are not closed. Thoughts start wars if the gates are not closed. And they do that by thrusting into our imagination a whole throng of spiritual vices. Be on your guard. If you made it through the flesh, if you made it through the pride of life, now you've got the devil. The first two are natural. This one's preternatural. It's a spiritual battle. And it just gets in there. If you're not paying attention to your recollection, you will lose this battle. You will lose it. I've got to wrap up. Let me see if the psalmist says, Psalm 77:49. Now, anytime I give you a psalm, it's different in other Bibles, but I just use the Dewey. So you've got to add one or something like that after the 13th song. I can't remember which one, but if you're using a different Bible. So Psalm 77 for the Dewey. He sent against them the heat of indignation, anger and fury and tribulation, a multitude of agents of misfortune. He opens a way for his agent, or for his anger, and he did not save them from death. If you let the gate open, and how do you open the gate? You open the gate by curiosity. You open the gate through bad conversation, thoughtless conversation, mindless conversation. You open the gate by just listening to the radio. These people are talking about nothing, and you're just listening to them. Driving, just listening to them. You know that's no good. According to your Christian dignity, all you're going to be doing is thinking about things that have nothing to do with nothing. And as soon as you get in that place, you're just going to throw a thought in there. And you're going to start thinking about it. It might not take effect until you wake up. But I know you all know it. You wake up, immediately you got a thought. Unless you're one of those people who reaches for the phone and starts listening. If you do, you will never enter into recollection. Even if they're holy talks, you will never enter into recollection because you're never listening to God. You're always listening to somebody else. Finally, we'll close with St. Paul. It's a quote of his from Ephesians 6:10. It's that famous one talking about armor and, the helmet and all that stuff. So Ephesians 6:10. Finally, brethren, be strengthened in the Lord and in the might of his power. Put on your armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the deceits of the devil. For our wrestling is not against flesh and blood, flesh and the world. It's not against flesh and blood. It's not these first two battles. He's already presuming that you Christians already have overcome flesh and pride of life. No, it's not flesh and blood, but against the principalities and powers, against the rulers of this world, of this darkness, against the spirit of wickedness in the high places. That means places above us, but below heaven. Remember St. Francis, when he would go into these towns that would be warring against each other, he would see demons, legions of demons just flying around the air. And then he would have, I think it was Brother Sylvester, and one of them was a priest, I forget which one it was. He's like, brother, say some prayers. And they would just all be cast to the, and his prayer would be, Francis commands you, or something like that. And they would just all go away. They're in the high places in the air, but below heaven. Therefore, take unto you the armor of God, that is virtue and prayer and grace, help from your guardian angel. Our guardian angels especially want to assist us in three ways. Something else Deosuna talks about. Wants to help us in three ways. We have assistance from the seraphim, from the cherubim, and from the thrones. Thrones are a choir of angels. The seraphim, remember, we're seraphic. You're in the seraphic order. Seraphic are those angels who burn with the charity of God in heaven. That's fantastic to think about. They burn with the charity of God. They're a flame. And so what do they want to bring? Purity. Heart. And then the cherubim. So what the purity, the love, what they want to do is they want to bring, they want to help fortify us in our will. In our will. Will is where we love. It's also, we could run the parallel with, from our will would be probably, well, I don't want to draw parallels that aren't going to be that appropriate. I should think through it first, so we'll leave it there. Then the cherubim, the intellect. They come in to illuminate the intellect. So they help us to be able to understand what we ought to be doing, not be doing, see things for what they are. We have to call on them and have them help us in these different times. But we have their assistance because they want to offer their assistance. They very much want us to love and honor God. And when we do so, I think I've talked about this before, especially in the virtues of purity. In the virtues of purity, a man becomes equal to the angels. It's something we should give another conference on later, but it's very beautiful to think about because the angels are pure spirits before God, but they have no concupiscence. When a human is pure before God, the angels see the great dignity of that human because they've overcome, maybe not overcome, but they do such diligence in fighting against their concupiscence, living in a pure state like themselves, the angels, that the angels no longer walk above them, but next to them in equal dignity. They see the dignity of a human being, a Christian, raised up through the purity of the life. Now, that doesn't mean if you've fallen at some point in time, Mary Magdalene lived very pure. We reclaim this. And then we have the thrones who help firm us in our will and our intellect and the work between those so that we can stay firm in our resolutions to do what we ought to do. The angels help us with this. So it's not just us alone. If we call on them, they're there to help. They want to help. That you may be able to resist in the evil day. This is St. Paul again. And to stand in all things perfect. Perfect. We're called to perfection. Stand, therefore, having your loins girt about you with truth, and having on the breastplate of justice, and your feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace, especially pertinent for us as we're Franciscan. In all things, take the shield of faith. When you start feeling that blasphemy coming on, you know what blasphemy is? It's not just bad words. People always think blasphemy is saying a bad word. Blasphemy, so you understand well, blasphemy is attributing something to God that cannot be attributed to God. And this is what the devils do. They want you to blaspheme. He doesn't exist. That's the worst blasphemy you could ever say. Somebody who's received existence, telling existence itself, think how proud that is. Telling existence itself, you don't exist. In fact, if he didn't exist, you wouldn't exist, because something has to be existence itself for you to receive existence. What stupidity, but the devil will get us there. He doesn't love me. He doesn't love you. You know you've felt that before. It gets in your head and you want to say it because you've been brought to your knees, your heart's breaking. You keep praying and you don't see anything coming from your prayers. He doesn't love me. He doesn't hear me. He doesn't know anything about me. He doesn't care. Blasphemy. It's all blasphemy. And you have to realize it's blasphemy so that in the end you can fight against it, because those are those thoughts that go right into your imagination and you're ready to say it. Now don't get too upset about it, because remember, you haven't known that. You didn't know that you were blaspheming God. But now you know. And so now when those things come into your mind, you've got to stop it right there. The thoughts, start wars if they come through the gates, if the gates aren't closed. Wherewith you may be able to extinguish all the fiery darts of the most wicked one. Being attentive, being recollective, keeping the gate closed. And take upon you the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. By all prayer, supplication, and supplication, pray at all times to the Spirit. And in the same, watching with all instance and supplications for all the saints. We take this last part for granted. By all prayer and supplication, praying at all times, in the Spirit, and in the same watching. Watching is meaning you're always attentive, you're always on duty, you're always being a Franciscan third order. It's not something you do when you come to the meeting. It's not something you do when they ask you about your little cross that you're going to get someday. It all has to do with you have to live a certain way, an elevated Christian dignity out in the world for the love of God. Always watching. And in the same watching, with all instance and supplication for all the saints. We do this for the love of God, for the sanctification and salvation of our own soul, and for the love of our neighbor. You have to remind yourself, threefold. If there's a threefold concupiscence, We got a threefold desire for holiness, for the love of God, for the sanctification of our own soul, and for the love of our neighbor. Right? So that ends our reflection. It went a little long, hour and 20 minutes. But we need these things because we need the spiritual foundation to be able to set ourselves, as they say in Scripture so often, in battle array. Because the battle is against us, and it's against us all the time. And as St. Paul says, it's with principalities and thrones and dominions and all these other bad guys that are more powerful than we are. But they cannot beat us. They can't. God will never allow it to happen. And what he does allow to happen, you can always bless his holy name for, because if he allows it, you're safe. St. Pio, they took it, the demons were allowed to take the curtain rod off the window, and they were allowed to beat him with it to blood. And no one could help him. Even his guardian angel just stood there watching him. The next day, Padre Pio said, "Why didn't you help me? He's just standing there. You're an angel." And he just said, "Who am I to obey? You or God?" God allowed the demons to beat Padre Pio. Why? Because souls have to be paid for. If you want to be a third order member, our job is to pay for these souls. Nobody wants to go to heaven anymore. They need grace, and we need to obtain the grace. That's why we have these moments in our rule for prayer. We pray to obtain grace, not just our personal prayers. We got to get the breviaries. To whatever extent you're able to do. Some of you are very busy. Some of you have a little bit more time. All of us need discipline. But whatever you're able to work in, do it. Follow the rule that we have. Say your prayers, even the very minimum, but say them and don't let them go, because by your sacrifice, we're going to save souls. Souls have to be purchased. And so, in our spiritual life, we are going to face dark clouds, and we're going to face lots of difficulty. And the demons are going to come at us because they don't want us to go to heaven. We have to just face the facts. You signed up for it. You're a Christian, right? And they can't beat us unless we let them. So, God love you. Let's keep each other in prayer. Let me put this thing back on so I can see where we're at. Let's see this.